Welcome to Restore the Glory podcast. My name is Jake Kim.
And I'm Bob Schutz.
We're two Catholic therapists sharing what we've learned personally and professionally to help you on the journey of restoration. If you've been blessed by our podcast, please prayerfully consider partnering with us on Patreon. Your support will help cover the cost to produce the podcast, but will also give you access to exclusive content like monthly reflections and special live stream teachings. Go to patreon.com/restore the glory and join the mission of experiencing the restoration of our God-given glory. Hey, Bob. Good to be back with you again. We are here continuing on in our series on sexual healing, and we've had a pretty cool run of guests that have been able to join us, and that's been a real great blessing. Sister Miriam was a little bit ago. Matt Frad was a little bit ago, or maybe the last episode. Today, we've got a pretty special one. This is a man who's been a longtime friend of ours, and a man who anybody who knows my personal story of redemption and restoration, this guy was a centerpiece in the whole thing. I'm really excited to welcome Christopher West to the podcast. Christopher, thanks for joining us. Thanks so much for being with us. We love you, and it's really fun to have you here.
Thank you, brothers. And I love you dearly. It's a joy to be with you and your audience.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
It's fun that we have such a history, isn't it?
It's incredible.
You know, a lot of us do interviews all the time, and we go in, we don't know who's interviewing us. They don't really know us. But when you go into an interview where, like, you guys are my brothers,
Yeah.
and we have a history, there's a beautiful richness that organically flows out of a conversation like that you never get in an interview where the interviewer doesn't know you.
It's so true. It's so true.
Jake and I actually physically met with you when we were in your presence.
Oh, you two met each other at Black Rock.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, we had talked to each other.
Yeah.
Through you. You had introduced us to each other.
Right. And for those who don't know what Black Rock is, it's where we offer our TOB courses through the TOB Institute.
Yeah. That was the first time we had shook hands. And
what year was that? Do you remember?
Oh, man, I had way more hair.
2009, maybe?
Yeah, that sounds about right. Matt, that was what Father Mark Toops was there. And
Yeah, that was the sexual healing and redemption course.
Oh, 2009. That was 2009.
That was the first time you offered that, Bob, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was like the birthing of this massive thing for you, Bob. And then I was your midwife and like, you can do it. Push, man, push. Yeah. And then Christopher, you and I have known each other since 2002, I think. I think that's when we first met, when you were back in Denver. And
yeah. So almost 20 years. Well, actually, we met before that in the late 90s
Steubenville.
when I was speaking at Steubenville.
Right.
And a shock to me, I know you know the story, Jake, but I was at Steubenville again this past April, and your daughter was at my talk. I was like, wait a minute. I met your dad at a talk I gave in Steubenville. How is this possible that I've been doing this long? I don't understand how the math works there.
It's how old were you when you first started? Like in Steubenville, when you started speaking, how old were you?
So I was 30.
Okay.
I was in my mid to late 20s when I got started, but the national kind of speaking circuit happened in my late 20s, early 30s.
It was funny because I remember there was the guy who was bringing in speakers. His name was Lewis Brown, still a friend of our family.
Oh,
yeah, Lewis.
Yeah, I remember Lewis Brown.
So yeah, he reached out to you, and we were like, "Who's this guy? Christopher from Denver? Oh, okay, sure, all right, let's do this." And man, did the Lord show up that night? That was some crazy. That was some powerful stuff. One of the first times I saw the power of the message that you were, really John Paul II's message of. I never know how to say that. It's like John Paul said, well, it's not really John, it's really God's. And then it's not really Christopher's, but it's John. Anyway, the whole thing, like the first time that was said that, man, you were rocking people's worlds and our mouths were open. Because I remember Heather, we were engaged at the time and we looked at each other. And it was Christopher, I could start crying right when I hear this because you were the first person who told us the cross has the capacity to break through and restore and redeem. And that message alone, who knew what Heather and I were about to go into? Our faithful listeners have heard our story a few episodes ago. Christopher, I cannot thank you enough for you knowing that to be true and fearlessly proclaiming that, despite all the garbage of debate that people have around that. I'm walking testimony that transformation can occur. I would not be married. I would not have 2 of my 3 kids. Like that is,
Praise God.
Oh,
thank you, Jesus.
It's
Thank
huge.
you, God.
Yeah.
Do not empty the cross of its power.
Right.
This is the cry of the new evangelization, John Paul II says. This is the cry of the new evangelization. Do not empty the cross of its power to heal, to restore, to purify, to transform. This, if the good news of the gospel is not that, then it's not good news.
Amen.
We're just piling up rules on people, and that's moralism, legalism. That's not Catholicism.
I'm walking, living proof of that the cross has the power to heal. And you always used to say, maybe you still do it, like you have beautiful feet. Because you're the one walking and sharing the gospel, man. Like, yeah, that's true. I love you deeply, and we've been able. It's a great blessing to be able to stay friends, and you really. I mean, one last thing, then Bob, I know you want to say some things. Like Christopher, you kind of paved a way for me to know what does it mean to be a man. What does it mean to be a Christian? Like you were one of those pivotal people. Like, I mean, even Barron's pivotal player, like you were a pivotal player in my life. And I had a seminarian here, 2 priests here yesterday that I formed in their seminarian years for 8 years. I was their primary human formator. And they were talking about legacy. And I sat there and I was like, in the spiritual realm, like their grandfather is Christopher West. In a way, that's how this went, because the stuff I'm sharing.
That's how it works, isn't it? I mean, and that's the right image too, because it's the very image Jesus uses to tell us what the kingdom is birth. You know, we have to be regenerated, and we become spiritual fathers, and then our spiritual children become spiritual fathers, and that's just how it works. I remember years ago when I went to tell someone who was a pivotal player in my life, Monsignor, the late and great Monsignor Lorenzo Albacete. I just wanted to tell him before he died what he had meant to me. And I laid it out, like I laid out to him, this is what you meant to me. And I'm getting choked up even remembering the conversation, because he meant so much to me. He was such a witness to this love that he had encountered that changed his life and set him free. Like, he was the most free man I've ever known. And when I told him my gratitude, he just simply said, well, that's the way it works. Yeah, that is the way it works. God works through our own broken humanity to reach others with the seed of the gospel. That's the way it works.
Yeah. It's like in sports, the coaching trees, you know, who Bobby Bowden coached and who that person coached.
Good image.
Yeah. And my introduction to you, Christopher, was your book, Good News, Sex and Marriage. And we were doing it as a men's. Well, first of all, there's a couple in Louisiana that told me about it. Started reading it, brought it to a small group of men that we were meeting, probably 25 men. And we were going through the book. And in the middle of that, you called me out of the blue. I don't know if you remember.
Yeah, I do remember that.
Yeah, and asked me to consider teaching, which took several years to get there. But it was just like this, total providence of here I am studying what you're writing and you're calling, and we had known some couples in common.
Right, that's right. I went to a wedding in 2005.
Yeah.
And met Lance and Nicole there.
Yeah.
And dear friends of yours, and they told me about you. And I was going through some trials in my ministry at the time, and I needed some advice and counsel, and Lance and Nicole suggested I contact you. So that's how I reached out to you in 2005, that was.
Yeah, and then I think I went up there in 2006, served on prayer team.
That's right.
And then we did that marriage conference together.
That's right.
A couple of them, actually. And so it's just interesting history. You're just looking at history and how much history forms us and the relationship over the years. So I'm also very grateful because it's shaped what I've done, not only my life, but ministry as well.
Thank you, Lord. That's the way it works.
That's the way it works.
Yeah, so listeners, Christopher did a podcast with Matt Fradd, which is just a great episode. But in there, Christopher, you talked a little bit more about Albacete and his freedom in his car,
Yes.
and all those are some really funny, cool stories. So I'll just tease the listeners with that. Go check out that episode with Matt Fradd and Christopher.
All right, here's a little teaser.
Okay.
French fries, car, hope.
Right.
How do those go together? You got to go watch the episode with Matt Fradd.
Yeah, that
That's
was
so
great.
true.
What a story.
My mouth just dropped open like, what? Right. And that's the guy who had a radical impact. Totally. You can see him just tagging along with the 12, like in Jesus. You can just see him. Like,
absolutely.
He's looking at the butterflies and Jesus just smiling at him. And the rest of the guys are like, you're so annoying. Get up here. Yeah. Oh, it's so good. Yeah. So speaking of history, Christopher, one of the things that I know Bob and I are more familiar with, but we'd love to invite you wherever the Spirit leads and wherever it's on your heart to share about. You talk a ton about sexual healing and just the depth of what it means to be male and female and the call to one flesh union, etc. Theology of the body. But would you be willing just to share a bit about your personal story? Because when you first encountered the theology of the body, you had like a heart that was hungry for it, right? It wasn't just like whatever going on. And so, can you tell us just about anything in that whole? That's a big.
Sure. I'm looking for an entry point to the story, and one I often pick is a few years ago. Wendy and I were just sharing some memories, and she said, "Do you remember our first anniversary?" And I said, "Refresh my memory." And she said, "Well, we were at a party and somebody came up to us and said, 'So how's the first year of marriage been?'" And I kind of proudly said, "Oh, a lot of people say the first year of marriage can be pretty rough." But I looked over at Wendy and I said, "For us, it's been great." And she told me, "No, this would be like, to almost like 18 years into marriage. We've been married now for 25 and a half years. But about 18 or 19 years into marriage, Wendy was telling me, 'Do you remember that night?' And then she said, when you said that, the first year of marriage has been great." Wendy said, "That's when I knew you were utterly clueless."
Oh, so good.
And that cluelessness was to last for about another 9 years. Really and truly, like I thought, we had our ups and downs the first 10 years of marriage like anybody. I wasn't entirely clueless to the human condition and my frailty. But overall, I really thought first 10 years of marriage were great. I had a great wife. I had great kids. My career was growing, and I was a best-selling Catholic author, and I was traveling the world, giving talks, and I really believed life was great. And right at the 10-year mark of our marriage, I was offered a very lucrative book deal by the biggest publishing house in the world. They brought me to New York City, they wined me and they dined me, and they said, "Christopher, we want you to write a book for husbands called Loving Her Rightly." And I was so excited. They were going to give me a nice advance. We were going to be able to pay off some debt and put some money away for the kids for college. I came home from this New York business trip so excited to tell Wendy all about it. And when I told her the title of the book, a book for husbands called Loving Her Rightly, her face just fell. And this was the beginning of a new level of my needing to grow, needing to heal. And I said, "Honey, what? I don't understand. What's wrong? I thought you'd be so excited as I am about this book deal." And she said, honey, you and I need to talk. And it's going to be long and it's going to be painful. But you need to know that you are in no place to be writing a book for husbands called Loving Her Rightly.
Yeah.
And for the first time in 10 years of marriage, I really listened to my wife. Like I really listened. the gig was up. And I knew, like, I remember, this is just popping into my mind right now. I remember when I was 20 years old and I had a little fender bender with a parked car, and I just fled the scene. And I felt so guilty about it. And the person whose car I had damaged somehow found out the license plate of my car or something and tracked me down. And I was so relieved when the person showed up and said, "You messed up my car," because I felt so guilty. I was like I didn't want to hide. And I had that same feeling when Wendy finally said, "You're in no place to be writing a book for husbands called Loving Her Rightly," because I knew in many ways I was hiding. I was wearing a lot of masks. And the masks I was wearing because I thought my broken, wounded humanity made me unlovable. And I knew then, like, I needed to go on an archaeological dig into my heart to discover why have I been wearing masks, and why have I been causing my wife this pain. And by the way, just to cap off this part of the story, I didn't write that book. I turned down the book deal because I knew my wife was right. And I just allowed my wife over the course of many weeks. This was 2005, and it was right at the time JP2 died, which is no coincidence here. When JP2 died, I really felt like he was saying, "Okay, Christopher, you know my theology very well in your head. You can speak about it eloquently. You can write about it eloquently. Now it's time to journey from your head to your heart. And I am now one of your main intercessors in heaven. And he fathered me. He truly fathered me from heaven through one of the most difficult times in my life, where I was listening to my wife tell me the story of what it was like to be married to the theology of the body guy. I put that in quotes, for the last 10 years. And she was right. It was long and it was painful. And thanks be to God, just a year earlier, I started seeing this priest for spiritual direction. And I've been with him now ever since 2004. And that year of kind of preparation and spiritual direction, I knew I could get naked before this priest. I knew I could really dig deep with this priest. And he guided me through this archaeological dig. That's the best way I can think of to describe looking at my heart, looking at the wounds from my own upbringing, from my own childhood experiences that led me into adulthood, where I started repeating the wounds that I had endured. I started passing them on to my wife because they hadn't been healed. They hadn't really been looked at. They hadn't come into the light. I was wearing all these masks because I was afraid that underneath the masks, I was unlovable. And I remember right around this time, I had a dream in which my property is surrounded by woods here. And both of you have been to my home. You can kind of picture this. And in my dream, I was in the middle of the night, I came running out of my house because there was some creature lurking in the woods. And I grabbed my flashlight. I'm like shining the flashlight in the woods, and I see like shadows and glimmers of this hunchbacked kind of monster-like creature lurking around in the woods. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what is that? Who is this? And how do I protect myself? And how do I protect my family? And I turn around and I'm suddenly face to face with this hunchback creature that had been lurking in the woods. And I'm looking in his face, and it's my face.
Wow.
And it was, as I took this to prayer, as I took this dream to spiritual direction, this was the unlovable me that had been hiding in the woods. And now he was saying, we got to come face to face with one another. You have to face me. You have to look me in the eye. You can't just keep me at bay anymore. You can't protect yourself from me. I'm coming out. I'm coming out of the woods. I'm coming into the light. And it's interesting. This is a light on the dream I'm having even now, 16 years later, that I was the one with the flashlight.
Yeah.
Wow.
Like I wanted this monster to come into the light. Wow. Like I'm having a light on this dream right now.
Amen.
Like it was the same sense of that guy who tracked me down when I messed up his car when I was 20 years old, and the same sense of Wendy finally calling me on the carpet and saying, "You're in no place to write that book." Like we have to come out of hiding. And most of us live the majority of our lives in hiding.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys want to comment more on anything I'm saying before I say more, because you guys both know me well. I can launch, but I don't want to just hog the conversation. But
well, you're on a good track, and I have seen that growth, and just the integrity that it takes to face those places that aren't integrated. You know, all three of us know that process and are on that process. It's just a frightening thing, but it's also so freeing as you're describing it. So I would just ask the question, go back to some of that excavation. Tell us a little bit about that process of things that you discovered in terms of the healing of your masculinity, your sexuality.
Yes, and it's a journey that, as we all know, never ends in this life.
Right.
It's an ongoing journey. It would be a fallacy for me to say, I've been healed. You know, I can see healings in my life. I can see great progress, praise be to God, but I also know the journey continues. So I can only speak to where I am right now. You know, if we had this interview 5 years ago, I could only speak to where I was then.
Yeah.
If we have another interview 5 or 6 years from now, praise be to God, if I'm still on the journey and I keep giving my yes, there'll be more to share. But yes, I can speak into what that archaeological dig, that excavation was like. We need people who can guide us through that. I don't know that anyone can go on that excavation alone. We need other people who have been through that kind of excavation and know they're loved when all of the crap is on display, and they can show us that same kind of love. And I had people, and I still have people, thanks be to God, who know that deep kind of love and were able to show me that deep kind of love. And it was the only way I could expose those deep wounds. And so the excavation took me back to my childhood and to the discovery of a lot of pain. Yes, with my mom, with my dad, their mother wounds, their father wounds. One of the most important wounds that I hadn't really looked at was a wound with my older brother. And I love my older brother dearly. And I want to preface everything I say here. You know, who knows, maybe he could come upon this podcast or something. I just want to say to my older brother, I love you. I love you so much. And I know when you were a boy, he was 2 years older than I. He was in a lot of pain. He was in a lot of pain. And that got dumped on me. And there is a deep, deep rejection wound in me. My older brother was the cool kid in the neighborhood. And I desperately wanted to win my brother's approval because I didn't have it. You know, it wasn't a physically abusive relationship, although we had our, wrestling matches and pillow fights and all that kind of stuff. Which, I don't want to paint all of that in a negative light. That rough and tumble stuff can be great, can form you in really great ways. But when it changes from rough and tumble to insulting and degrading. And oftentimes our interactions would start off with, just kind of brother stuff, teasing, but then it would cross that line into degrading and undignified, and really wounds in my life come from being rejected repeatedly from my older brother. The kind of constant barrage of "you dork, you little shit." That was the constant message. And this is a memory that came to light through spiritual direction. That it was a traumatic experience that I had coped with by laughter. And I was on a retreat in which I was giving. This was right after JP2 died. I'm on a retreat the retreat leader was asking me to kind of do an inventory of my life, and a memory came up in which my older brother had pinned me down on the ground. I was probably 6 years old. He would have been 8. And he had my younger sister, who was 2 years old at the time, who had a dirty diaper. As I was pinned down, he had my sister with her dirty diaper come sit on my face. And I was telling this story just because I was going through an inventory of my life. And I was like, oh, here's a funny thing that happened when I was, I think, 6 years old. My brother pinned me down and he had my sister come sit on my face with the dirty diaper. And the priest who was leading the retreat started to tear up when I told him the story. And he said, and I was telling it with laughter, like this is like folklore in the West family. Hey, remember the time when little Christopher, remember when Soren Jr. is my older brother, we called him Ren when he was a boy. And you remember when Ren held little Christopher down and Emily came and sat on his face? And, we told this story many times and everybody laughs. And this priest said, Christopher, that is not funny. And he said it with tears in his eyes. And it broke my facade of laughter. I had used that laughter to hide a deep, deep wound in my soul. And he gave me the permission for the first time in my life to realize that is not funny. And with that was like an opening. That was one of the first openings to a deep, deep place in my heart of rejection. And we're talking here about sexual healing, and maybe some people out there listening are going, well, what does this have to do with sexual healing? And some people might think it's a stretch to connect these dots, but there is a direct line in my soul from those rejection wounds that I endured, and how I would years later as a teenager and into my young adult life, and into my marriage as well, the way I've lived out my sexual relationship with my wife. These wounds don't just go away, and they strike us and wound us and hurt us at the deepest place of our identity. And our identity is a sexual identity. And by that, I mean, I am a male. My identity is that of a male. And if I feel a wound in my identity, that is an identity in my masculine identity, because I don't have any other identity. The only identity I have is a masculine identity. It's who God made me to be. He made me to be a man in his image and likeness. So the wound of rejection played itself out by trying to win approval. And winning approval in my psychology, the way I had been formed and shaped by the world, the way you win approval, especially from other men, right? And that's what I needed. I needed approval from other men. And there are two main ways in kind of adolescent culture in America that you win approval from your male peers. Excelling at sports is one, and getting the pretty girl, right? I tried the excelling at sports thing. And when it came to sandlot football or sandlot wiffle ball, like the unorganized sports, I was really good. We used to do the sandlot football every day at the park near my house after school. The guys would gather, and I'd always be one of the first to be picked, when the team captain said, we want you and we want you. And this was like really bolstering my sense of identity and confidence. But I never played organized sports. And then freshman year in high school, all my friends, all the guys who'd been doing the sandlot football, they had also all been involved in organized football, and they were all going out for the football team in high school. I had never done organized sports, and all my friends were doing it. So I went out for football, and I was terrible. I don't know what it was, but as soon as I put those pads on and that helmet on and there was a coach and it was official, I couldn't catch the football for the life of me. and it really wounded my identity. And there was this, oh man, I'll never forget it. This is sophomore year. I went out football freshman year. I went out for football sophomore year, and I thought wasn't good freshman year. I thought I'll give it one more try sophomore year. And I'll never forget, the coach put me in as wide receiver sophomore year. I'm wide open. The ball got thrown to me, and the guy who was defending me jumped up to intercept the ball. And I felt like, oh my gosh, the ball's going to be intercepted. So I changed my posture to go tackle him because I thought he was going to intercept the ball. But he missed the ball. It went right through his hands and bounced off my shoulder pad. Had I caught that ball, I had a 30-yard stretch to make a touchdown. Nobody could have got me. I did not catch that ball. And man, the coach railed me, like dug into me at halftime in front of all my peers.
Wow.
It was brutal. It was brutal. And I like inside, I said, I'm done. I am done with football. I am absolutely done. And I stopped playing that year, and I never went back on the football team. But what happened between my sophomore and my junior year of high school is pivotal to the story. The pretty girl fell in love with me.
Oh, wow.
The girl that all my friends, especially my best friend from grade school, he had a crush on this girl forever. Everybody wanted this girl, and she wanted me. And this was my new, and by the way, I didn't understand what the heck was going on when this was going on. I didn't know this is what I was doing. I'm playing out childhood wounds to win approval from men because I never got it from my brother. I'm still trying to be the cool guy who wins the approval of the males, right? And I couldn't do it with sports, so I did it with this girl, and man, did it work. I remember the first week of football practice junior year when I didn't go out for the team, but now I'm dating the girl that everybody on the football team wants to date. And I show up at football practice with her. And I'm like planting my flag in front of all these guys, like, whoa, look at my manhood. Look what I got. Look what's going on in my life. You guys are out there sweating your nuts off, pardon my frankness, but you're out there sweating your nuts off to win your trophy. I got my trophy right on my arm. I have arrived into manhood. And I remember I got such approval from my wider family. My mother's the oldest of 11. And my older brother and I, we were considered like number 12 and 13 because we like fell right in line with those younger siblings of my mother. And my brother had won the approval of those younger aunts and uncles. Like he was part of their club. And I always felt like an outsider there as well. I couldn't win my brother's approval. I couldn't really win the approval of some of my aunts and uncles. And when I had this girlfriend on my arm, I remember one of my mother's sisters, the first time she met my girlfriend, I was in the basement at my grandmother's house. My girlfriend was upstairs meeting, one of my aunts showed up unexpectedly. And I overheard the conversation of my aunt meeting my girlfriend. And she came running down into the basement and she said, "Is that your girlfriend? Oh my gosh, she's gorgeous." And that was like huge chest, like, oh my gosh, I have just won the approval of my wider family here with this girlfriend. She was my trophy. And I don't know any of this stuff is going on when it's going on. I'm 17 years old. I don't know what's going on in my inner life, but that's what was going on. I was trying to establish my identity as a man through this relationship with this attractive girl. And I did, it sounds very usorial, and at some level it was, but we're all wheat and weeds growing together, right? There were some genuine aspects of love in that relationship. It wasn't entirely usorial, but it was usorial, at a deeper level. And I was just unaware of that. And, long story short, I dated that girl for 4 years. And and I thought I was going to marry her. We dated from 16 to 20. And when she broke up with me, she said, I'm leaving you because you don't know how to love me. And she was right. She was right. I didn't know how to love her. And, I had set myself up to claim my identity in what other people thought of me. And that was really the recipe for disaster in my life, because when you posit your identity in what other people think of you, then you spend your whole life trying to win their approval, and you will do it in all kinds of ways. And that was one of the main ways I did it. I'll take you back to another memory of 8th grade. I was hosting a party at my house. The way I coped with my rejection from my older brother was basically, if you can't beat them, join them. And there was a time in my childhood, and this all came out in spiritual direction many, many years later. There's a time in my childhood where I separated off from myself, the self that was being rejected by my brother, my real self. And I just accepted the insults as true. And I just, somewhere deep in my spirit, I said, if you can't beat them, join them. I can't deal with the pain anymore of being in the place of receiving all those insults. So I'm going to separate off from my wounded self and hurl those same insults at myself and agree with my older brother's diagnosis that I'm a dork and I'm a little shit. And I'm going to reject myself and wear a mask to win other people's approval. And now I'm going to be the cool kid in the neighborhood who decides who does and does not show up to my 8th grade party. You got to listen to the right music. You got to wear the right clothes. You got to ride the right bike. You got to be as cool as I am. Translated, you have to be as lovable as I have made myself to be in order to be part of my party. All of that is just to paint the background of what happened when I started dating Wendy, the love of my life. Wendy and I are dating. This is 1995. We had known one another for about 3 years. We were dear friends. I had a 3-year history of a friendship. And our romantic relationship turned from friendship to romance very quickly. I proposed to Wendy 7 weeks after our first date.
Wow.
We had a long history, so there's a real foundation there, but it was very quick. And during that real just hustle and bustle of a 7-week dating relationship, we were sharing our lives with one another, sharing photo albums with each other from our childhood. And I remember Wendy showed me some pictures of her childhood right about, 13, 14 years old, 8th grade. And my face just fell because I realized, oh my gosh, if Wendy and I had gone to school together, I would never have invited her to my 8th grade party. She didn't wear the right clothes. She didn't listen to the right music. She didn't ride the right bike. She wasn't cool enough to come to my 8th grade party. This was the source of great, great pain in our relationship. And this was the source in the excavation, right? The archaeological dig. This went back to the source of the problem. Those 10 years, the first 10 years that were really tough. When Wendy said, you're in no place to be writing a book for husbands called Loving Her Rightly. In order for me to understand the roots of why I was causing Wendy pain in our relationship, I had to go back to this place as to why I would not have invited her to my 8th grade party. I had no tools whatsoever when I was 25 or 26 years old and I saw that picture of Wendy in 8th grade. I had no tools whatsoever to understand the roots of my own pain. It would be, 10 years later that this stuff would only start coming to light. But here's how it went. I really thought the loving thing for me to do, I was so afraid that Wendy was going to experience the same rejection wounds from my family that I experienced. My aunts, my uncles, my brother. and even to some degree, my parents, maybe to a lesser degree, my parents, but there is a real strain of perfectionism in my family. And the basic message is I'll just say it frankly, get your shit together.
Mhm.
Get your shit together. And don't show me your brokenness. And you got to fit this mold to win our love and our approval. And Wendy did not fit that mold.
Mhm.
And I honestly believed the way to love Wendy, to spare her the rejection that I experienced, was to give her, and I put this in quotes, cool lessons.
Oh.
If you don't want to be rejected by my family, you have to learn what I have learned. And here's what I've learned. I've learned how to wear masks so I don't get rejected by my family. And out of my generous spirit, I'm going to teach you how to wear the same masks that I've worn so that you also will not be rejected by my family.
Wow.
Whereas the lesson that I was meant to learn, and which is the overarching story of my life, this is why, one of the reasons, and a big one, why I needed Wendy in my life. And somehow my spirit intuited this, and I know it's why I asked her to be my wife, because I intuited, even if I couldn't articulate it, I knew this woman is free. She does not wear the masks that I wear. And oh my God, I knew somewhere in my spirit, I knew that this woman could set me free from the prison of hiding behind these layers of a false identity. Because Wendy learned earlier in life that her mom was not going to buy her all the name brand clothes. She was not going to have the more expensive bike that made her stand out in the neighborhood as a cool kid. And she had to wrestle at age 11, 12, 13, 14. And, we all have to wrestle between here and the beatific vision. We all have to wrestle with who am I really? And where does my identity really come from? And by the grace of God, Wendy wrestled with those questions at a much earlier age than most people. And not that she came out totally victorious. She has her own insecurities and fears like any human being does, but she really was compelled to come to a place of encounter with Christ and find from Jesus Christ and find from her loving Father in heaven and find in relationship with the Holy Spirit and the communion of saints. She had to discover who she really was. And she did at a relatively mature way. She discovered that in her teenage years. And so she marries this guy who is really still locked in childhood, really still locked in these lies he believed as a boy about what makes him lovable or unlovable, which, by the way, that itself, as we know, is a lie. There's no such thing as an unlovable human being. But that's the lie I believed. If you don't dress this way or behave this way or listen to the right music, you're unlovable. And I can't cope as a boy with the idea that I'm unlovable. So, and I don't know about the love of God. I have had no encounter with the love of God. So I just come up with coping mechanisms to avoid concluding that I'm unlovable.
Yeah.
And I come into married life at age 26, and I want to spare my wife the rejection that I've experienced from my family. So I teach her how to wear the right clothes, how to listen to the right music, how to behave like I behave so you don't get rejected. And all along, she, in her deepest heart, rightly so, is thinking, does my husband really love me? Does my husband really love me? If he loved me, he wouldn't be trying to mold and shape me into somebody I'm not. And the real story of healing and redemption here, and by the way, all of this gets played out in the marriage bed. All of it.
Yeah.
The marriage bed is the window into the soul of the relationship. It just is. What's going on in the marriage bed? If you want a direct window into the health or lack thereof of the relationship, then don't go in there by yourself. It's too scary. Never go in there by yourself. As my spiritual director says, Christopher, go within with him. Go within with him. Never go poking around in your wounds or your spouse's wounds by yourself. It will only lead you either to rationalize the pain and the wounds away and justify yourself, or it will lead you to despair. Those are the only two options if you go in there by yourself. Mm-hmm. But if you go within with him, he will show you in all of the pain and tension and frustration that is manifested in the marriage, which comes out in the marriage bed. He will show you that he loves you right there. And he will show you a path to healing and wholeness that will take you on an archaeological dig into the deepest roots of where your pain comes from. And that journey showed me where my pain comes from. And it showed me that I was just passing that same rejection wound onto my wife. Mm-hmm. And my wife's pushback is the real lesson here that I needed to learn what she had learned. I was trying to teach her how to wear masks so she doesn't get rejected by my family. She was trying to teach me, Christopher, you are lovable by your heavenly Father as you really are. Mm-hmm. What? Mm-hmm. You mean I don't have to wear these masks? You mean the rejection that I have felt in my life is known and I'm loved there? What? And miracle of miracles, my wife loves me there, even though she has experienced the pain of my rejecting her. She's returning love? What? Excuse me? What world is this? Yeah. What world is this? I don't know this world. Somebody please lead me into this world, because that's where I have to live, because it's the only real world there is. Otherwise, we're just pretending and we're wearing masks and we're hiding. And I'll sum up with this. I know I've been long-winded here. I have come to learn through my own journey that the Christian life really can be summed up as the reversal of the shame that entered in the garden. I was afraid because I was naked. I was exposed. My real humanity was exposed. My broken, sinful humanity was exposed. And I was afraid that I was unlovable there, so I hid myself. The journey of the Christian life, the journey of healing that we need, and it is, you cannot escape it. It is the healing of our identity, and our identity is a sexual identity. It is the healing of our sexuality. It is a sexual healing. And forgive me, I'm hearing Marvin Gaye, right? Sexual healing. That's what we need. That's what we need. It's maybe not what Marvin Gaye was necessarily singing about, but we can redeem everything, including Marvin Gaye's song there. We all need sexual healing. We need identity healing. And our identity is a sexual identity. That's what I'm trying to say. Mm-hmm. And that journey is precisely the reverse of the shame that entered after original sin. Our hearts must get to the place where we can say, not just in our heads, but because we have an experience of it in our hearts. I was at peace because I knew God loved me in my broken, naked humanity. So I exposed myself. I came into the light. I revealed my wounds, and I discovered I'm loved right there. That's the journey. That's it. Between here and the beatific vision, everyone must go on that journey.
Amen.
Christopher, that there's so much that you're saying there, and there's so much that we could unpack. And I love, because what you've just done is laid out an awesome testimony. Like, really, you just, like, to use the archaeological analogy, you just walked us up to your heart and started pointing out the storylines of depth and what you saw under the surface, and how you pulled back false layers and then got to deeper dynamics, and new things have grown, and what the Lord's put in its place, etc. There's so much there. So what I want to ask us to do is to pick up in the next episode, where we kind of break some of this down together and kind of step into it a little bit more from what is all of that? How do I navigate through all that? Like, sexual healing, right? I thought we were talking about, what you do in the bedroom, and really you've spun it in a way which is very true, where it's about male and female, right? Like your
Our
classic
identity, yeah.
yeah, you the phrase you've said for years, when you go to do your job interview and they say sex, you don't say yes please, right? You check
Right.
male or female, right? And so that's the nuance, I think, that maybe what? Like what? And it's like, and I think our response is exactly. It's not just, this is a phrase that I say, it's not just, sex isn't just something that you do. It's not just an activity. It's who you are, and what you are speaks to your sexuality. And I'm hearing you really zoom in on that, on how that manifests. So what I want us to do is we'll break this down in the next episode. So listeners, you just got a great story of seeing all these things. And next episode, we're going to break all of this down and dialogue it out, and really point out some really cool features and how the healing process occurs there. So we want you to tune in next time, and we look forward to seeing you again there.